So Angela, we've heard, I think, from our colleagues here, a number of different areas where the DFIs could actually come and play an interesting role in preparation, development, and then finally in financing. From the perspective of a DFI, what would be your suggestions for developers? How do they best engage with the DFI community? At what point of the cycle? In what what sort of role do they bring in a DFI? What have been some of the things that you have seen that has worked well and others that have not? And finally, also then help set the stage for the Q&A by telling us a little bit of what the DFI community is looking at in terms of project development finance and where we go from where we are.
Thanks. Reg, I think what you just said is really music to my ears. DFIs, of course, take a long-term perspective of all the African countries, and we look at the full value chain of infrastructure development. I think my advice to any developer is that you engage the DFIs as early as possible for these reasons. Number one, DFIs have a lot of the local knowledge and experience in these countries, and they can bring it to bear, advise you on how best to approach different government stakeholders. Secondly, DFIs put in the time to build local capacity. The African Development Bank, for instance, has set up with other donors the Africa Legal Support Facility. I think many of you have had this experience. We have set it up so that we can empower the governments, so that you have a worthy counterparty to negotiate with. Not only do we build their skills, impart them with some confidence, but we also try and make sure they have world-class legal representation. I think that has helped in a lot of transactions, and we have more and more governments taking up this offer. Number three, we do help in shaping policy and regulatory reform, obviously due to our long-term perspective. I think we have IFC Advisory that has been doing it for a while. The African Development Bank as well, under the new president, is going to set up to work very closely with partners, most especially the World Bank and Power Africa in this space. Later on, I'll talk about what concretely we're doing as the African Development Bank. And then last but no means least, we do also dabble into the risk capital space. African Development Bank a few years ago set up Africa 50. I think we decided to put our money where our mouth was to address the dearth of bankable projects. So yeah, for project developers, I think it's most advisable that you get the development fund institutions involved at a very early stage. Now, what hasn't worked well? I think we need to do more about the project development vehicles. The 67 or so project development vehicles, I think at least someone counted them. A few years ago, we didn't know how many. So I think the next step is for us to get together under the African Development Bank's New Deal on Energy, especially in the power sector, to see how we can bring all partners together. It's a strategic partnership that we're trying to build to make life easier for all those who are trying to bring capital into Africa. What has worked well? I think we've all increased our budgets towards African infrastructure. And I think we have a lot more interest in private sector in developing projects in Africa. So with that in mind, I'd like to say that, yes, infrastructure is a good asset class, especially African infrastructure. Maybe I'm preaching to the converted, but I don't think you can find the returns you find in Africa anywhere else. I think that's why many of you are still in Africa, despite the frustration, and there's a lot of low-hanging fruits, and you have partners that are ready to hold your hand.
Thank you, Angela.
Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.